Good morning, afternoon, and evening. I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar co-hosted by IGF and CONNEX on technology trends and implications in mining, a community impact perspective. This is the second of two webinars on the role of technology in mining. A first webinar took place in April and focused on the implications from a law and policy perspective. The second part today will zoom in on the implications at the local level and how new technologies impact mining communities and their relations to their own governments and mining companies. We're very pleased to be joined by an outstanding group of panelists to discuss the topic, and I will introduce them in a moment. We have asked them to reflect on how the suite of new technologies coming up is likely to impact local communities, both positively and negatively, and more importantly, what the ways are in which involved and impacted stakeholders, so governments, companies, and local communities can think ahead. Briefly about myself, my name is Sunmin Kim, and I'll be moderating today's session. I work for the CONNEX support unit. We are a G7 initiative that provides partner governments with short-term multidisciplinary support on contract negotiation in the mining and infrastructure sector. For us, this topic is particularly interesting to understand from a state investor community relations perspective. Today's session is structured in three parts. We will begin with an input from IGF to set the stage, and then go on to a discussion with our panelists. For the last part, we will open the floor for questions from the audience. So please feel free to send us your questions in the chat as we move through the session. And please provide an indication to whom the question you're posing is addressed to. Now, delving into the first part, let me introduce you to Isabelle Ramdoo, Deputy Director of IGF. Her previous posts have included the African Minerals Development Center and the European Center for Development Policy Management. IGF is currently in the final stages of a study examining the risks and opportunities the adoption of new technologies harbor for resource-rich countries. It's an endeavor that's made possible through the support of CONNEX's sister program at GIZ, Extractors for Development, and the German Federal Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation. Isabelle, very grateful for some of the reflections you'll share to frame our discussion. With no further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sunmin, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Just for the sake of that presentation and to ensure that my internet is stable, I'll just stop my video and then I'll pick it up later. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sunmin. Thanks for the introduction. As Sunmin mentioned, for those of you who do not know IGF is an intergovernmental forum, and we focus on mining, minerals, and metals for sustainable development. Our aim is to support our member governments in optimizing the benefits of their mineral resources and in limiting their negative impacts where those arise. We have a membership of 79 countries. As Sunmin mentioned, this is the second part of a conversation that we started in March, and we are very pleased to host this second discussion again with CONNEX. I'd really like to give you, before Sunmin and our speakers dive into the core of the discussion, I just wanted to provide with a bit of a framing to the conversation today. And okay, how does that work now? Technology is failing me. Okay, right, sorry. So let me first just unpack a little bit the types of technological trends that we'll be talking about today. In the last few years, and as Sunmin earlier mentioned, with the support of GIZ, IGF has been looking at the impacts of new technologies in the mining sector. We did a technology impact review to understand what types of technologies were coming, what were the big driving factors, and how those technologies separately and concurrently would impact various stakeholders. The review confirmed that the new wave of technological adoption is a combination of evolutionary but also revolutionary technologies, with an increasing focus on the latter. Key drivers for the acceleration in adoption of new technologies include more difficult geology, declining ore deposits, the need to reverse a secular decline in productivity, the need to improve safety of mine workers, to manage environmental impacts, and more recently, a reaction to pressures from the COVID crisis. A key observation is that we're looking at a suite of different innovations that work together in concert. it is not just individual technologies that are driving changes, but combined forces and coupled with human intelligence. And this is what makes this fourth industrial revolution really different. To simplify, we've classified the various technologies in 4 baskets. First, we have sophisticated machines embedded with technologies meant to boost efficiency of mining operations. Here we are talking about automated machinery, digital twins, supercomputers for big data analytics, etc. Second, we have software technologies that collect, analyze, and integrate this big data and share it through high-speed connectivity and networks. And here we're looking at things like Internet of Things, the use of 5G, blockchain technologies, etc. A third basket is what we call enablers of digitization. These are technologies that provide an interface between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. And here we include things like drones, sensors, connected wearables, etc. And then there is a final group, what we call process improvers, which are essentially aimed at boosting the performance and improving footprints of operations, including things like electric vehicles, water management technologies, renewable energy sources. One of the big drivers of this is requirements like ESG and a reduced thing of carbon footprints. So all those technologies combined are meant to make mines safer, greener, smarter, and more agile. Now, at what pace are those technologies being adopted? This slide gives you an idea of all the different types of technologies are mentioned in the 4 baskets. But what you should retain from this is that in the one of the latest report of the World Economic Forum, they did a big survey around the future of jobs, and essentially 90% of the companies that were surveyed said that by 2025, there are basically 3 big type of technologies that will be mostly adopted. And those include things like hardware and robotic process automation, digitization and connected wearables, and big data analytics. Also, an overall 75% of the mines surveyed also said that they were investing in the 3 first basket that I mentioned, this is really coming by 2025. And close to 60% of mining companies are also investing in green technology. And COVID has been a big accelerator this year. So this report came out a little bit before, but this year COVID has really fast-tracked some of this adoption. So what impacts are we likely to see? First, I think we need to recognize that the magnitude of impacts is very difficult to measure. We are looking at a suite of very different innovations and applications, each of which will have different impacts depending on the country's level of development, on the mine location, on the type of mining operation, whether you're looking at underground mining or open pit mining, and on the types of stakeholders involved. Just quickly here, 3 issues I wanted to highlight. One is for the mining companies itself. The whole point is to overcome increasing geological challenges, improve labor and asset efficiency, and overall productivity. So from a business perspective, impacts is largely going to be positive, but relationship with communities might change if benefits such as jobs are seen to be eroding. Secondly, for governments, national level socio-economic benefits such as taxation or local content are generally core expectations, and those will be impacted in a way or another. So then what implications then for the deal between the state and the mine investor if some of those expectations change? And then for local communities, which is the core of what we'll be discussing today, often the mining sector is the sole, if not the largest employer. Some technologies, such as automation, can displace local jobs with ripple effects on local economies. And in the absence of alternatives, implications can be disastrous. But on the other hand, you have some new technologies that can provide new and better opportunities for local communities and for men and women. And overall impact for communities will depend on how the transitions are anticipated and managed, and on the partnerships that industries, government, and communities together can build to strengthen resilience and to leverage the positive spillovers that technology can bring to the local field. So let me quickly highlight some of the implications here. I want to mention two things. One is impact. One is obviously employment, because this is what people see as a mine phase. As I mentioned earlier, one of the most significant and immediate form of value that a mine can bring to host communities is often jobs. And this is not only direct jobs, but also everything that revolves around mining that can create business opportunities. And there is a recent report by Ernst & Young's, that the latest one at least, that showed that labor impacts of technology could become the second highest risk for the industry if the transition is not well anticipated. Why? Obviously, because technologies could displace people, and then some other estimates show that about 20% of jobs could disappear by 2025. And therefore, if nothing is done, this will probably affect low to mid-skilled people. That might have an impact. But not all jobs will disappear. Many of those jobs will look different, which means that there is a need to increase the focus on training and education, both for current workers through retraining and reskilling, but more broadly to prepare the future labor force. Skill sets will be very different, so curricula will have to be reviewed, and subjects like science, technology, engineering, maths, for instance, will need to be widely developed. Unfortunately, not everyone will be able to be retrained. First, because some tasks will become redundant, so you may not need traditional drivers anymore if self-driving trucks are adopted. But that doesn't mean that the jobs of drivers will disappear completely. In that case, finding alternative livelihoods or facilitating the transition to other economic sectors for those who will be furloughed is critical to prevent social crisis and impoverishment of local communities. And in the future, most jobs will probably be in the supply chains. So one needs to think about how do you improve local procurement strategies so that local communities could benefit more from supply chain opportunities. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the positive impact of technology. Very often we have a tendency to see technology as a threat, but it can bring a lot of opportunities to build resilience of local communities. Here I wanted to mention two things. One is through shared infrastructure. So three things: energy, access to water, and shared connectivity could become real game changers. Connectivity, for example, new tech is not possible without safe and reliable and high-speed connectivity. So sharing reliable connectivity can overcome physical remoteness for rural communities, and that can be transformative, not just for people, but also for the economic development. It can help upgrade the quality of education, health services, etc. The same for energy. I mean, mining companies are investing in renewable energy to reduce cost and decarbonize their operation, and that last mile investment to be shared with communities can be game changing. We know very well that energy enables economic advancement, and it can open up vast potential to develop alternative livelihoods, especially if direct opportunities at mine shrink. And the last point I wanted to make is data. Supplying local communities with some data sets of interest that mine collect, notably through those connected machinery, can be a powerful development tool. They say data is power, and big data provides a wealth of information that range from mineral endowment, ore grades, trade flows, quality readings about water, soil, air, climate forecasts, you name it. And if this is shared with the right group of people, that can really help improve mining governance on one side, but also unlock economic opportunities. And just think about it. Data can provide better understanding of resource base, help improve mineral valuation, assess trade flows, even support authorities to combat illicit mineral flows or illicit financial flows. And it can also help communities and other economic sectors, such as agriculture, for example, and help improve environmental management, etc. So with some of those thoughts, I just wanted to put 3 questions on the table that will be discussed in the second part. Then to me, the question is, can technology provide an opportunity to reconceive the engagement among industry, governments, and communities? Are current mechanisms that support communities like CSR, are these still fit for purpose in the current structure, or can we think about new and innovative social investment mechanisms that can have longer term impact, bearing in mind that, you know, bringing in the technological side of things can help rethink the traditional ways of engaging communities? And last but not least, how are governments and communities working together? Is the conversation, for example, around local content evolving? And are there any thoughts currently going on regarding technologies as an enabler in the government industry conversation? So Sunmin, with those few words, I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Isabelle. That was a great overview, touching on the 3 aspects of trends, risks, and opportunities. Let's now turn to our panelists to pick up on some of your questions. As I introduce you, I'd like to ask you to briefly raise your hand so that our participants see who is who. We have with us today Santiago Perez Ospina, Director of Mining Promotion and Development at the Secretariat of Mines of the Government of Antioquia in Colombia. With a background in mining and metallurgical engineering, both in Colombia and Australia, Santiago has previously worked also as a university lecturer. Cristina Bruce, Head of International Relations at Anglo American. Having been with Anglo for nearly a decade, Cristina leads Anglo's international public affairs engagement with regards to innovation, the future of work, and climate change. And she also provides guidance on government and stakeholder relations across the Americas. Then we have with us Kristi Disney Bruckner, Executive Director of the Sustainable Development Strategies Group, where she develops and implements research, assessment, and capacity building programs that focus on aligning resource governance with sustainable development objectives. And other current roles include an advising role for the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, as well as teaching roles on mining and climate change law. Last but not least, Hervé Lado, Country Manager for Guinea in West Africa at the Natural Resource Governance Institute, working with government and civil society on questions of extractive governance. He will soon be managing NIGI's work in Senegal as well. And in previous research and work, he has focused on the impact of large-scale extractives and infrastructure projects on local development, particularly in Cameroon and Nigeria. So first, I would like to turn to you, Hervé. What I found interesting about Isabelle's intro is particularly the new opportunities and forms of benefits she touched on. But of course, there are 2 sides to the adoption of new technologies. Opportunities don't necessarily offset risks one-to-one. Based on your experience, how do you perceive the technological advancements in the sector? Where are we headed? And are there aspects you see bigger potential for than others?
Thank you so much, Sunmin, and thank you, Isabelle, for the very interesting introduction. And you have really set the scene of the debate with a very useful taxonomy and analysis and overview of the subject. In my view, I think I will explore the same kind of presentation, but with some examples from Guinea. I can see the technology impact or influence on mining activities on 2 ways. I can see it as a tool or a means to gather stakeholders so that they can work together and collaborate in order to achieve some objectives like local content objectives, knowing that in our understanding, local content is not just about communities, but has a national scope in jobs and contracts. So we have on the one side those opportunities, like the technologies that assemble mining companies on the one side and subcontractors, job seekers, or let's say mainly on this type of subcontractor exchange, platforms together, contract seekers from the communities or from the country, so that they can get the information on the opportunities to get contracts from mining companies. You know, on local content issues, the main aspect, the main challenges is to provide information or to access information on what are the contracts, the opportunities to service the company, to provide services or products to the mining company. So we have those online platforms which are developing, in fact, expanding in many countries. In Africa, for example, in Guinea, the subcontractors exchange was set in 2017. It is operational since 2019, and they are achieving really interesting results in connecting people, connecting local companies and mining companies. This is a kind of revolution in the landscape in Guinea. So that is clearly an opportunity with this kind of technology. Another kind of technology is those cadastre online, mining contracts online, you know, those platforms that help people, citizens, access the information that were clearly confidential for long. And now we have also satellites that help to monitor the impact, environmental and social impact of, you know, in Guinea, it is bauxite production mainly, and it has expanded very rapidly in the last years and creating environmental and social impacts. There are dust, for example, deposits of dust on plantations, on crops in communities, and satellite solutions can help now monitor those deposits and help request intervention from the government or from mining companies. This is on the one side. The other side of the story is technological advances that just sometimes oppose stakeholders. Like you see those solutions brought by companies integrating more advanced technology equipment in the production, so to accelerate the production, so to bring productivity and competitiveness. Those are positive, in fact, in the long run. But in the short term, there is clearly a challenge for governments, because I will just bring an example from Guinea. In March, when the Minister of Mines was promoting and presenting a cutting-edge equipment acquired by a mining company to accelerate the production of bauxite, many comments were just from communities, we will be losing our jobs. It's not a good news for us. That is very positive for you, the government, because you are looking for productivity. But for us in communities, we are looking for jobs. We will be losing our jobs. So those that integration of technology can be really challenging because of those impacts. But there are solutions. Maybe we may come back on solutions, but there are ways to curb that kind of curse. Because when there are mining revenues flowing, governments are, let's say, innovating in the ways to capture some of those revenues so that they can fund projects within communities. This is a way clearly to redirect some of those people losing their jobs because of technological advances to other sectors and to diversify the economy. And there are many spend that mining companies do in the communities, what EITI calls social spend, social payments to communities that can be huge at the level of a community. And there are also mining development funds, some percentage of the turnover collected by the government that can be directed to projects beyond the mining sector, so to develop other activities so that people can have jobs they lose in the mining sector.
Thank you, Hervé. I think that was a very concrete example of Guinea looking at sort of the short and what could be short and long-term challenges and some ways to offset some of these risks. Santiago, I would like to turn to you. Given your experience in the government of Antioquia and considering a bit the picture that Isabelle and Hervé just painted, what might come short and long term, what is your view? Is there a need, you think, for you to rethink sort of the scope of local content? What are some of the impact that you see to your work today that might look different at the regulatory level tomorrow?
No, muchísimas gracias. Quiero primero que todo, pues.
Thank you. Yes, I want to thank, first of all, IGF and CONNEX for the invitation to participate in this panel. Actually, this is very important. All these topics are huge, and the way how Isabelle presented it, I think as she was presenting this, I was making a mental x-ray of what is happening in Colombia currently. It's like she were describing actually the issues we're having in this country, particularly in Antioquia, my department. I am part of the department government, let's say a state government. And through this department, as it is called in Colombia, we're in the middle level in technology. I mean, I would like to clarify that from the government, there are three different scales, I would call it, or levels. At a national level, that would be the first one. The second one would be state or department, as we call it, and a local level or scale, municipality level. I think these changes were undergoing in mining that we expect to be accelerated due to pandemics mostly, will affect these three levels in different ways. So I think from the local level, I would say people would tend to look at all these technological changes in a negative way, mostly from in the department of Antioquia, where I work at currently. We have high inequality. If you see the capital city and its surroundings, its metropolitan area, we have a development level which is comparable to any big city in the world. But we all know that it is there where we do not have the mining sectors, the mining industry. In Antioquia, Antioquia is very inequitative with regards to the access to knowledge. If we see this presentation of Isabelle's, it's all based on disruptive changes and big data, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, which if we talk about the metropolitan area of Medellin, yes, it's okay. But if we talk about the community at the local level surrounding the mining project, from that point of view, we mostly have negative impacts. So I consider that more than from the regulatory point of view, what the governments should do as a state would be to think more in training, education for these communities settled around the projects, the mining projects, receive the biggest benefit of having that mining project as a neighbor, as a good neighbor. And finally, at a national level, just to close up, from the national point of view, what we see is more the macroeconomics of mining, and in one way or another, for the national government, it will always be very positive, as Hervé Lado was mentioning. This is great. Launching this is very good because it's higher productivity, but for the neighbors, it's terrible. Now, thinking instead of working in more regulation, because in Colombia we have too many laws. For everything we have a law. We should be thinking more of, on behalf of the mining authority, but more from the government perspective, how to educate and make and put these local communities at the levels of our higher or bigger cities in higher education and technology, so we could have this kind of equality.
Thank you, Santiago, for breaking this down also to the different levels for better understanding, and yeah, putting the focus not just on the regulatory level, but what can be done. If I may add a follow-up question to you, Santiago, could you maybe talk to a little bit also about the readiness level? I mean, you talked about, this is seen very negatively, that the government should think ahead of what can be done. You mentioned training, education measures. How do you see the government engaging and communicating around this upcoming change to communities who are maybe not yet so ready about this?
Bueno, no, yo pienso que desde el gobierno lo que podemos hacer es
I think on behalf of the government, what we should do is basically educate, train. The way out of this is basically based on education, showing these communities the potential the undersoil has. Most of the times communities, local communities, are very disinformed. So if, as a government, we start with certain communication campaigns where we can tell about the potential under the soil, the mineral potential they have, they will some way or another start accepting these mining projects. In Antioquia especially, we have lots of misinformation regarding mining projects and topics. And most of the times, private mining industry have to get there to the community and doing that job, the work of the government. So what we have to do is work hand in hand along with communities and mining companies to make this potential visible for the communities, since communities are mostly focused on the soil, and they forget that under the soil, which is on behalf of the nation or the property of the nation, that it exists, that it can also produce wealth. In these social links we have based on what it could generate for them, the undersoil for them. I would say that for local governments, and what we should do is make it visual, communicate this better, all these potential under the soil, mostly in Antioquia, where we have a big mining potential.
Thank you very much. Cristina, so part of your work at Anglo involves working on themes that will impact the future of the mine. We've just been hearing, and Isabelle also highlighted this, that there's a strong association with job displacement and other threat factors. What is your perspective on sort of the social license to operate? And more importantly, do you see this as an opportunity to do things differently, and what can actually be done?
Thank you. I can't help but just very briefly respond or incorporate Hervé's comments and Santiago's. I think, firstly, just for what I'm about to say, Hervé, I think it's really important to distinguish between total numbers of jobs and skills. And a lot of the trends that we're seeing are about different skills that will come into play and be required. And then, and Santiago, your emphasis on the need on health, education you spoke of, and then the need for collaboration. And those are all themes that we're very much focused on. Just a couple of comments on Anglo. So from our perspective, we see that the world we live in is going through exponential change. We're focusing right now on new technologies, but new technologies comes with rapidly changing societal expectations and societal attitudes about jobs, about the role of companies, and about all of the issues that we're discussing right now. And COVID has just accelerated that. So as a company, we're trying to unpick that. Our global strategy rests on people, innovation, and portfolio. And if we think of that from a future work perspective, we're going to need to focus on people in order to enable the innovation and the new technologies that will ultimately allow us to focus on our portfolio. So people, and it's already coming through, really need to be at the center of this. We're facing change, all of us are facing change, and with that there's uncertainty and there are fears, but we don't know what the future holds. And so the way we've started approaching this is we've developed 5 principles that will guide all of our work going forward. And I'm going to list them because I don't have all the answers. I can share with you the work that we're developing. We're committed to listening, we are committed to collaborating, to being transparent, to investing in the future, and to be guided by our purpose, which is to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. And so those 5 principles are guiding our approach to this. So when it comes to your question about social license to operate and responding to community expectations, as we try to listen, I think this is about ultimately creating value. So it's not just about jobs. Jobs and economic development are a key part of that value, but there's also social cohesion. And then there are also the expectation that mining companies have to contribute to the broader positive impact that Santiago was referring to, health and education. There's also a high expectation that we need to transform our environmental footprint. And a lot of the new technologies that we are considering will contribute to doing that. So a lot of the technologies that we're looking at, certainly linked to the environment, will significantly reduce energy consumption, water consumption, the geographical footprint of mining. And then some technologies will trigger these concerns. It is really, really difficult to come down to hard, concrete conclusions of this bit of technology is going to impact and reduce X number of jobs. It's not as simple as that. It's about unpicking all the different skills involved, I think Isabelle was alluding to when she was talking about her example of automated haulage. So I think that when it comes to the jobs, what we're really going to have to do is to work really closely in collaboration with government, with communities, and with government at the national level and at the regional level. And we're going to have to unpick what are the requirements, not just for the industry, but the other industries that operate in the area. And not just our workers of today, but the workers of the future and what expectations they have. And the only way we're going to be able to answer those questions is by creating the right collaborative mechanisms to do that. We've started that conversation in various countries that we operate in. And we're having to work through what that looks like. Another initiative that we strongly believe in, and as new technologies have become a focus, we will be focusing ever more in, is something we call collaborative regional development. So it is our response to the expectation that is placed at our feet that we will need to create jobs. And the reality is that we can't satisfy the extent of that expectation right now. And so what we're doing is we are supporting the establishment of an independent institution that brings together national level, local level government, multilateral institutions, private sector companies, and NGOs in a specific region to use spatial analysis to then look at what industries have a good future and a good potential in that region, whether they exist or not, and then invest in collaboration over the longer term to promote development in a holistic manner across a region. So that's trying to realize that mining is one part, and then trying to work across the board to respond to community expectations around the value that we need to bring.
Thank you, Cristina. That was actually a very interesting example of sort of not just what is coming up, but also the mechanisms in which you are already starting the dialogue. Kristi, I think my question ties into a little bit the question of mechanism and formats. So personally, and also just from a professional perspective, it's always of interest for us at CONNEX to understand sort of how trends and impact can be embedded into mechanisms managing the relations between state, investor, and in this case, communities. Based on your work and your experience, what are some of these mechanisms that could capture the benefits or risk mitigating measures and translate them into something tangible for the communities?
Thank you so much, Sunmin. And thanks to this panel for the excellent examples that you've shared already. And I'm so pleased to follow Cristina and these themes of the need for listening, for transparency, for collaboration, the approaches that we really promote at Sustainable Development Strategies group include multi-stakeholder initiatives that incorporate the work of governments, communities, companies, and others working together to exchange information around best practices for responsible mining, to advance innovative practice, including technologies that can optimize mining sector's contributions to sustainable development. The Intergovernmental Forum is a unique space for governments to exchange best practice on this theme with each other and with other stakeholders. So we're so pleased to work with the IGF. And given that SDSG is based in the US, we're also delighted to see that the US has joined the Intergovernmental Forum, which continues to grow and thrive. One of the areas that we have been focused on is looking at types of mechanisms to advance relationships between companies and communities and promote community development. So I'll share in the chat thread a new resource that we have developed in collaboration with the International Institute for Environment and Development and the Colombia Center on Sustainable Investment. It's a free public collection of community development laws and agreements for the mining sector, including almost 300 pieces of legislation from 54 countries and an interactive map and searchable online database. So in this database, you'll find community development agreements, which can be between companies and local governments, in some cases between companies and community leaders or subnational governments, national governments in some cases. And others, we see legislation that requires some type of trust or fund to be developed. But this is a space where researchers and policymakers, civil society, and the general public can access the laws and agreements in one space. Some of the trends that we have seen looking at these agreements and legislation are that there is an increasing number of these types of requirements in national legislation, much of them in more recent years, and using mechanisms including company community development agreements and national and subnational trusts or funds to distribute revenue from royalties to mine affected local governments and communities. So one aspect that we see that's so important is that whatever format of community development is utilized, that these themes of listening and transparency are really crucial, because communities will vary widely in what development means for their community and for different sectors of the community. So the community having a say in what development means for them is imperative, and having a role in negotiating and changes that are made in a mine development project in unique circumstances in their region, in the environments are really crucial, because we know that change is constant. So relationships must be constantly navigated. So these types of frameworks are really important, and use of multi-stakeholder frameworks, voluntary initiatives are also important. Beyond looking at these laws and policies, we see that in every government and every community member will see that political will shift and ebb and flow from time to time. So multi-stakeholder frameworks can really help navigate where there are gaps of political will to continue initiatives for responsible mineral development. So I think having multi-stakeholder initiatives, having these company community agreements is really key in navigating beyond gaps in political will and continuing accountability, even where that governance may be lacking. There's no substitute for good governance, but this can help maintain the initiative and inertia that we need where there are gaps in good governance. So, company leadership and acknowledging where company leaders are really stepping out to make efforts for responsible management of minerals, for responsible governance is so important. And continuing these efforts to have access to information for communities, community engagements, grievance mechanisms that are meaningful for communities, and having an ongoing role for NGOs and civil society is absolutely crucial.
Thank you very much, Kristi. I'd like to now come to the Q&A session. I think we've had a lot of food for thought, and I would like to open it up for questions. I'll directly look at the first question that had come in. I think this one is directed to Hervé, given that it's about Guinea. The question goes, do the African mining regulations, especially that of Guinea, have provisions that take into account the future of mining?
Yes, clearly, it is an interesting trend we can observe in Africa to see how many governments consider that the mining sector cannot be seen as a jobs provider for for the long term, because the mining sector is going technological. So they start with the African mining vision, which clearly expect countries to develop regulations on the diversification of economies. First, promote jobs that can appear in the sector, and use the revenues and the activities to develop other sectors in the economy. This is clearly the kind of backbone of policies now in the sector, in the mining sectors in Africa. If I take the example of Guinea, there are many mining development funds that has been created in the mining code of 2011 and amended in 2013. Those mining development funds, one is directed to mining communities, and it is a share of a turnover of mining companies, and the other is a mining payment transfer from the central government to local communities, to all communities of the country. And that one represents about 60% of all mining revenues accruing to communities. This means there are tools existing now and developed by government. And what is really interesting in the case of Guinea, it is that the provisions set the requirement for the use of those funds. They should be used for infrastructure, including internet enhancement in communities, so that people can develop all the activities at that level. And so infrastructure and income generating activities. And this is really interesting, because if it is implemented as it is written, and there is an agency, a government agency set by the government in 2017 to support the communities, the municipalities in the use of those funds. And it is really interesting that the transparency in the use of those funds has been provided for in the mining regulations, so that citizens know when the funds are transferred to communities, how they are used, and if there is really the capacity to develop jobs and new economic activities, so that the communities can help diversify the economy from the ground. That is really a really interesting trend we can see in Guinea, in Senegal, in many countries in Africa now. And sorry, I will mention as well, that is very important, it is the education aspect. Many countries are developing institutions, technological institutions, to train nationals on technologies, and in collaboration with mining companies. There is a school of engineers in Guinea, which is now really expanding in its capacity to host trainings to nationals working in the sector, so that they can adapt to this technological change.
Thank you very much, Hervé. I see a second question. Will the impact of new technology change the net amount of dollars or $ money that will be invested in ESG? What trends do you see in the transition? I think the question goes to whoever wants to take it. Do I have any volunteers? I think I saw Cristina's hand, and then Kristi. Please, Cristina.
I'm very, very happy to give my thoughts. Two parts. I think firstly, it's not ultimately about budget. It's about impact. And so some of the technologies that we are looking at don't come under ESG budget in the first place. So for example, Anglo American is developing a new technology to reduce the amount of water in tailings. And that could potentially reduce the amount of water in tailings by 85%. That has a significant environmental ESG impact, but it's not related to ESG budget as I think the spirit of the question alludes to. So I think when it comes to new technologies, it's really, really important just to focus on the impact rather than the amount of budget. But secondly, regarding the actual budget, there is no doubt that ESG budgets are increasing and will continue to do so, as I tried to allude to, because the expectations that the societal expectations that are placed at the feet of big corporations and certainly mining companies are ever growing, and the need for us to respond to that is ever sharper. And so the amount of investment in ESG will grow. So I see that transition as only going one way, but perhaps to link in to the first point again, this is about the ESG impacts of core business rather than having a kind of self-contained little pot that's got CSR written on it or that has ESG written on it. This is about the right way of doing business. That would be my starter for 10, but over to you, Kristi.
Sure, I'll briefly respond that absolutely I see an uptick in focus on ESG by companies, investors. You know, I'm sure that Santiago will concur with me in, you know, teaching young professionals and young people and engaging with them that there's a absolute focus on this from younger generations as well, upcoming and demanding the ESG investments and responsibility. And we see that this just makes good business sense. Governments are starting to look at this in due diligence and supply chain standards. Buyers, consumers are increasingly focused on this.
Thanks. And I think, Isabelle, your hand is probably also to this question. I think it ties very well into the initial question you asked about, is CSR sufficient? And yeah, I'm giving the floor to you, sorry.
Yes, thanks. My question actually is not linked to this one, but to something that Cristina was mentioning earlier when she was talking about the collaborative regional development. So I was just, you know, wondering whether you could expand a little bit about where, you know, the experience that Anglo has had in various jurisdictions, how is that playing out? And then to what extent you know, technologies are embedded in those regional development programs or collaborative regional development initiatives that you have. And then and then maybe to Santiago then, as a segue to this one, is there anything similar that in your region you're looking at, like those broader spatial development around mining and communities?
So our first CRD, collaborative regional development, just I'll refer to it as CRD. Our CRD initiative has been in Limpopo in South Africa. And we are at the stage there where we have the core institution and partnership established. And now it's looking at the specific projects and how we can support them on the ground. And that's our leading, that's the sort of most advanced. And then we have initiative in Peru. We've been supporting an initiative in Colombia. We'll be looking at other countries in Southern Africa over time. So it's a question of not biting off more than you can chew and making sure that we've developed the project sufficiently in one country to then learn from another. So that gives a sense in terms of learnings. As a mining company, ultimately many majority engineers, you know, it's quite tempting to design a project, control it yourself, and then execute it, and then measure how you've executed, because a lot of what we do involves that kind of structure. And the thing about CRD is it is true partnership. So although it's a concept that we have initiated, it establishes an independent partnership structure jointly funded, and the goals and objectives are shared. And so we are learning that that you can't control all the objectives in a partnership that's a real partnership, and absorbing the implications of that, and also absorbing the pace at which the projects develop because of that partnership, because you've got to go on other people's timelines, are lessons that we're really having to absorb. The other thing about spatial analysis is that it's very research based and then very future focused, and the reality might not have developed in that way. And so how do you marry what all the research is telling you with the reality on the ground? Sorry, just as an example, so it looks at what industries might be appropriate for a region. And some of the examples that are coming up are agrotourism, but that are specifically linked to eco-friendly types of agrotourism, different types of technologies. Sorry, Isabelle, your second question was looking at how those are future focused. We're shifting the emphasis as time passes. We're increasingly shifting the emphasis. So, for example, we're looking at an initiative in South Africa to use 3D printing to locally print the pins that are used in a specific piece of technology on our mines. So that's an initiative that we're considering at the moment, which is, future focused. Also looking at ways in which we can leverage the internet connectivity that we're having to establish for our mines with communities to then enhance future skills and future industries. So it's getting there, but this is very much a journey, and we're at the beginning of that journey.
Listo, perfecto. Sí. En lo que
yes, regarding regarding to Antioquia, at this point, we have two big multinational mining companies doing some works which are interesting and reproducible, valuable to be shown. There are companies that hand in hand with the department government have been working in supporting from their social responsibility, the support of different industries. As Cristina was mentioning, we have been supporting the topic regarding coffees. Colombia is famous for coffee growing. So what we have worked on mostly, and this is a coffee region, we have worked on coffee making or coffee growing, tourist industry, everything regarding uniforms and things we can make locally for the mining industry. We have also developed a model where local mining companies create foundations, local foundations, and that these foundations be able to push forward initiatives and entrepreneurship within the local communities. We have also been working from the department government in labor reconversion. We are conscious, aware that with all these, changes in the mining industry, people are going to lose their jobs, and we teach them that this is not the only industry, that mining industry can lever other industries. We know that, and we can develop and diversify that way employment. We have also been working hard in topics regarding environment due to the mining closings, where we have some mines which are in the process of being closed. And what we're looking for is making them into ecologic parks. How can we integrate the closing of a mine to ecologic parks where we can show not only the environment topic, but the didactivity of the development of mines? You just not go to an ecologic park, but also you enter to part of the mine, not obviously all the mine, but that allows you to understand mostly in underground mines. You can go there, you can have restaurants within the mine. How can you have museums within the mine? Things like that to get mining closer to the communities, in getting them close and showing them that while the mine was within the operation, it generated resources, but that after closing, this asset can become something that also generates resources and leaves a legacy to the community. This we have been working from the department government along with private mining companies. But it is also, it's something very pedagogical, very teaching. So you can enter these mines and you can see what they were doing at the operation of mining. And in the underground mines, being able to have these eco-touristic parks. That's more or less the idea we've been working on from the Department of Antioquia government.
Thank you. So I have two questions, and looking at the time, I think that will fill up our time. The first question goes to you, Cristina. Do mining companies, for example, Anglo-American, have skills initiatives to prepare the local populations surrounding the operations for the transition to the mining future?
Thanks. So as I say, we're at early days, but the answer is yes, we have some. They range, again, I hope I alluded to, you're considering your current employees, you're considering their skill set, and then you're also considering the employees of the future. And so when you refer to local population, that bleeds across both of those buckets, because often local population are also colleagues. So just to cover the range of that, an example, in Chile, we recently launched our first remote operating center in Chile. A large portion of the mine is operated remotely. And there's been an entire series of training programs to support everyone in that, not just the operators in the more obvious technical skills, but all of the change, all of the whole change management approach around all of that has involved a huge amount of skilling and reskilling. So that's an example. With regards to, I don't know whether the sentiment of the question was more about communities that are perhaps less linked to the mine at the moment. Again, this is a small pilot, but we've done an initiative where we've trained a group of young people through a Microsoft program and LinkedIn program on a series of 10 different skill sets, which will be appropriate for the future. And so we're at the moment absorbing the lessons of that in order to increase its scope. So it was just under 100, so really small pilot, but we're trying to look at what that would mean and some of the lessons we've learned from that to increase. And I've got my eye on time. So those are two examples, but we have others. But as I say, none of them are. We have an internal digital literacy foundation program where almost anyone from a sort of very low junior management level upwards, but it will be rolled out more over time, can access a series of bite-sized nano courses once they're completed. There's a facility to potentially do an online nano degree. So different examples, but we're, as I say, at the beginning, but we're heading that way.
Thank you. And Kristi, great that you're raising your hand, because the next question goes to you anyways. The question is, please give an example of your project initiatives. Maybe there are a couple that would tie to the topic that you would like to mention.
Okay, well, I wanted to follow on with some examples of initiatives that we learned about from a collaboration with the Mongolian Council for Sustainable Development and Social Responsibility as part of the New Tech New Deal project that Isabelle described at the beginning of this webinar. So for the Mongolia case study, which was researched last year, we looked at Mongolia's mining sector and impacts on sustainable development, looking at impacts of new technological trends. So based on almost 50 different interviews with government bodies, mining company executives, technology experts, community engagement experts, mining company suppliers, industry groups, labor unions. We looked at some trends in Mongolia, and some of the interesting takeaways were that new technologies in particular are really helpful in helping, as Cristina noted in her example, in managing environmental and socioeconomic impacts, particularly around mitigating use of water and mitigating dust, which is a major issue in Mongolia, but also in broadening access to information. Where in countries where there is access to internet, use of digital communications technology can be an incredible way for companies to share information and also obtain information for rapid response to community concerns. So this was one way we saw that Oyu Tolgoi, for example, was using an app, using technological tools to increase frequency of communication and reduce company response time to community level concerns. On the topic of gender equality, we still have a long way to go in the mining sector, but this is an area where mining technology can help improve access to jobs for women. So some of the mining executives reported that uptake of technology was associated with increasing jobs for women in their mining sector. So as an example, on an international level, employment of women in the mining sector is at around just under 16%. And in Mongolia, the Bayan Arag mine reported that 17% of full-time employees were women. Oyu Tolgoi reported that 35% of total employees were women, and attributed this in part to technological advances. So there's a focus on increasing technological skill development, training, looking at how this is in fact reducing job-related accidents and increasing the level of pay for those jobs. And at the same time, we have to look at the downside of that, the jobs that are lost, and what do we do to replace those? So one of the takeaways there was using technology to help develop small and medium-sized enterprises, increasing internet connectivity and helping suppliers build access to new markets that can extend beyond the mine sites. And this relates to planning for mine closure, which we know can happen at any time because of a severe weather event, a pandemic, a downturn in the economy, or maybe even when we planned for the mine to close, which is rarely the case. But these were some of the interesting takeaways from those studies, and I can respond to other questions if they arise in the last few minutes of our webinar.
Thank you. Isabelle, you had a quick reaction you wanted to share.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask a question to Hervé, but the Kristi's last comments on gender kind of prompted me to ask her a follow-up question to this, because this research that we're doing on new technologies, we were looking at labor, and of course, when you look at labor, it's very hard to put your fingers on numbers because sometimes data doesn't exist. We had a bit of a difficulty to get data on gendered implications of the future of mines. And you were just mentioning a couple of numbers in Mongolia. I was just wondering, because one of the things that struck us when we were doing the research of new technology is that there is a sense that, and we've seen a few studies, for example, in Sweden on this, there is a sense that the current mining jobs are very masculine, and digital jobs will also be very masculine, just because women don't take STEM education to the extent that men do. So there is a sense that even if on paper, new technologies can provide more opportunities for women, in reality, the fact that the skills are not there, we might end up with a similar kind of challenge when it comes to opportunities for women in the mine of the future, because the digital skills geeks, you've got more men than women. I was just wondering, I mean, this is a curiosity question based on your study, whether in the numbers that you mentioned, you could give us a bit of a sense of the type of occupations where you found where there were really more opportunities, and if you stumble into this kind of intuition that we had about the masculinity of the digital mine of the future.
Mm-hmm. That is such a great question. And I love seeing that mines are starting to measure this. So this is progress in itself that we're getting numbers. But for the study that we've done so far, the numbers that I just mentioned are just a lump sum. So I don't have them broken down, accessible to you at the moment, but I think that's something we can follow up on for the reports that we'll share later this year on the New Tech New Deal study. But these are metrics that mining companies are increasingly measuring, which is encouraging. But we're also, stepping outside of the New Tech New Deal study, seeing that legal frameworks are requiring this. We're seeing new frameworks start to use language such as men and women, he and she, and recognize that there need to be accommodations for male and female workers, and the various ways that we can help support that through family leave, paid time off, the healthcare we provide, the childcare that we provide, that is valuable for men and women and families. And frankly, for responding to the COVID pandemic is so important. So this gender equality theme and the data connected to it is really imperative.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's definitely a topic that is very rich. And I'm just sorry, I'm mindful of the time. I don't know. I know that people scheduled it for 1 hour and 15 minutes, so I don't want to overrun. I think this calls for a third webinar, frankly, and we'd be very happy to do that. Thank you so much. This was a very engaging conversation. Thank you so much for breaking this down into the many different aspects, but then feeding it also with examples of already what's happening and what you're doing. I hope with this webinar, we wanted to offer an opportunity to reflect and think ahead. And I hope for everyone there was a little bit of something that was helpful and useful to them. I wanted to give thanks to our speakers. Also a very big thank you to IGF for making this possible, both on the content and organizational level. To all the participants, thank you for your very engaging questions. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, from my side, I wish you all a good summer and all the best, and hopefully see you soon. Isabelle, some final words?
Yes, I wanted to thank everybody, the speakers, and then everybody for staying, because we had a good group of people participating. And also feel free to reach out to us, because I think this was a very rich discussion. And we're working on this topic, and we will be working on the gender issues in the future. So you will hear more from us. And don't hesitate, if you have any questions, to drop us an email, and we can pick up where we left because of time. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Chao.